All right, everybody. So I'm going to give you a little summary of the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, book written by himself. Okay, this is chapter 1. I'm just going to read to you the things that I underlined in the chapter that I thought were significant. I was born in Tuckahoe near Hillsborough and about 12 miles from Easton in Talbot County, Maryland. I have no accurate knowledge of my age, never having seen any authentic record of it. By far the larger part of the slaves know as little of their ages as horses know of theirs. And it is the wish of most masters with my knowledge to keep their slaves thus ignorant. So basically he starts out by telling us that he knew no knowledge of his age. Slaves weren't allowed to know their age, like when they were born. He was born in Talbot County, Maryland. And in Tuckahoe it's called. He says, I was not allowed to make any inquiries of my master concerning anything or his age. He was never allowed to ask his master about it. He says, my mother's name was Harriet Bailey. She was the daughter of Isaac and Betsy Bailey, both colored and quite dark. My grandmother was of a darker complexion than either my grandmother or my grandfather. My mother and I were separated when I was an infant, before I knew her as my mother. It is a custom in the part of Maryland from which I ran away to part children from their mothers at a very young age. I never saw my mother to know her as much, more than 4 or 5 times in my whole life. She always made her journeys to see me at night. She lived on another plantation like that was in the area. I was not allowed to be present during when his mother he found out that his mother was going to die. He wasn't allowed to be present at the funeral or burial. He talks about how slaves were getting whipped. He says the master is frequently compelled to sell the slaves out of deference to the feeling of his white wife. So he talked about how some of these slave masters would be fathering children with the slave women, and of course they would come out like they wouldn't be dark, they would be like lighter complected, and the slave women knew that these were his children, her husband's children, and so he would sell those slaves all the time because the wives would really hate those children. He also talked about how the slave masters women wanted like those slaves, the mulatto slaves, to be whipped really bad and punished. But a lot of times the slave master wouldn't allow it to happen because he knew that those were his children. He says one of his masters' name was Anthony. His farms and slaves were under the care of an overseer. The overseer's name was Plummer. Mr. Plummer was a miserable drunkard or a profane swearer and a savage monster. He says Mr. Plummer would have great pleasure in whipping slaves, it seemed like. The louder a slave screamed, the harder he whipped. And where the blood ran fastest, then he would whip there even longer. He talks about he had an aunt, her name was Hester. So basically, his Aunt Hester was really pretty, he says. And he says one of the most beautiful women he ever saw. He says that the slave owner was in love with her. He like used to have sex with her and stuff like that. And so what he told her was she should never be in the presence of, he would never wants to find her in the presence of a black man, basically, or this other slave that lived on another plantation. And so one night when he desired to have her, he says, she wasn't present. And so when he was able to find her, he says, I'd never seen a woman get whipped that bad in my life. He says, my aunt was a woman of noble form and of graceful proportions, having very few equals that I've ever seen, and few superiors in personal appearance among the colored or white women of our neighborhood. And he just talks about how the slave master really whipped her really bad, and he'd never seen something like that before. So that's chapter 1. Some of the things that were talked about in the chapter, the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave. If you read the book, let me know some comments. Hope this helps you. Thank you.